On January 9, 2024, UFO investigator Jeremy Corbell and journalist George Knapp released a forward-looking infrared video captured by the U.S. military, which seems to demonstrate a very strange, unidentified flying object, which was reportedly tracked by the U.S. and its allies. The video was recorded in October of 2017 over a restricted joint operations facility in Iraq. It's reported that this UAP was considered a potential threat at the time and is now classified as unidentified, like the Tic Tac, Gimbal Saucer, and many others. Here we can see a stabilized version. This is clearly not your typical flying disc, sphere, or triangle. This thing looks almost biological. It looks like an Imperial Seeker droid, actually. This Jellyfish UAP was reportedly known to some of the witnesses as the Spaghetti Monster. This case is another example of the ongoing pattern of UAP incursions on or near military installations, training areas, restricted airspaces, etc., etc. It's alleged by Corbell that 2 allied nations of the United States were blocked from access to the footage for reasons unknown. He also reported that the changing color of the jellyfish is a result of the forward-looking infrared camera capturing the UAP rapidly changing temperature from hot to cold. Others have argued, fairly in my opinion, that this could be the result of the camera itself adjusting. I am not an expert on this type of equipment myself, but what do you think? It's even been reported that this strange UAP could not be locked onto, and their locking system appeared to be jammed. Jamming radar is considered an act of war by the United States. In an interview with the Liberation Times, Corbell stated, "If UAP are able to penetrate our sensitive military installation with impunity, disabling our primary targeting and defense platforms, we must consider the role stigma and secrecy have played in corroding our ability to acknowledge and respond to such threats." It's entirely possible that this UAP could end up being something prosaic, a weird-looking drone. But if what other witnesses have stated is true, that there is a longer version of this video, which depicts this UAP going underwater and then flying out at a 45-degree angle, then this goes out the window. Michael Sinkowski, a Marine who served in intelligence surveillance, saw this Jellyfish UAP video in 2018 in an Iraqi base, a year after it was recorded. While he did not see the jellyfish firsthand with his own eyes, he did have access to more footage of the jellyfish than what is publicly available. Sinkowski says that this UAP was well known on the base, and that some officials referred to this UAP as the Spaghetti Monster. So what exactly does this leaked FLIR video show us? The Jellyfish UAP is reportedly still classified as unidentified. Personally, I'm going to reserve my full judgment until we see the video, which depicts the jellyfish descending into the lake and later shooting off at a 45-degree angle. However, we cannot ignore that trained military personnel and intelligence surveillance officials, credible, trained observers, who would normally be capable of identifying such an object, are completely unable to do so, and their theories are unable to account for all of the facts. As I said before, this continues the pattern of UFO activity and incursions at or near military training grounds, restricted airspaces, installations, and bases, as well as nuclear facilities. Corbell and Knapp described another Jellyfish UAP incident at one of the most sensitive U.S. Department of Energy facilities, the Pantex Nuclear Weapons Plant, 15 miles east of Amarillo, Texas. For years, this location has been one of the U.S. government's primary nuclear weapons assembly and disassembly facilities. Thousands of nuclear weapons have been disassembled there, and the resulting plutonium pits are stored at the plant. UFO researchers have long documented that these anomalous crafts seem to have an interest in our nuclear weapons and nuclear energy. Researcher Robert Hastings spent 40 years interviewing over 150 former or retired U.S. military officials on their UAP encounters at nuclear missile launch facilities, storage areas, and weapon test areas. His research has been at the forefront of this topic, and I've covered it previously on the channel. Lou Elizondo, former head of the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program and current advisor to the Space Force on, quote, classified topics, has stated that ATIP's data corroborated Hastings' research. He has also commented publicly on the connection between UAP and nuclear energy, citing the pattern of incursions at nuclear weapons and energy sites. So not only do UFOs intrude on our military's training exercises, bases, and facilities, but also onto our most highly secretive and well-guarded secrets, our nuclear weapons themselves. Given this connection, it's no surprise that the phenomenon has haunted the US's primary nuclear weapons assembly and disassembly facilities. When describing this Jellyfish UAP's incursion onto the Pantex facility, he stated, quote, what was described to us, it was filmed on both night vision and thermal. It's not a video we have. What traversed down this channel between two different areas where storage locations, a lot of plutonium storage, and that kind of thing, was best described as a domed structure, 8 to 10 feet in width, a little taller at the top like a dome, with what was described directly to us as like tentacles or dendrites that came down. And the thing goes through this area with controlled flight. It ends at that kind of channel, goes up, and shoots off at a 45-degree direction. So that's what's described to us, and apparently, somewhere, there's footage of this kind of thing. There is very little information about this incident currently. It's also unknown when or if this footage will see the light of day. However, this is not the first time that a so-called advanced aerial threat trespassed over the Pantex facility. One of the previous sightings here took place during the little-known 1957 UFO wave. November 8th, 1957, the Amarillo Daily Times ran a major front-page story about a multi-witness close encounter with a UFO over the Pantex Nuclear facility. The encounter itself took place the prior day, November 7th. There were many reports of strange lights gliding across the sky. These reports came in from all over the state of Texas. In particular, bright, multicolored lights were reported on the western horizon. At approximately 7:46 p.m., these objects began hovering over the Pantex facility, which was then controlled by the Atomic Energy Commission. The objects lingered for half an hour. The plant guards reported these objects to the State Highway Patrol. The patrolman stated that the guards seemed positive that, quote, they saw more than just lights, that objects were in the sky. Guards who witnessed the UFOs again reported more than just flashing lights, but 3 intelligently controlled, disc-shaped objects hovering only 50 feet above the ground. The guards and scientists were, quote, all shook up from the incident. It was reported that at least one of the strange objects briefly landed on a road 3 miles north of Highway 60. The guards attempted to sneak up on the objects, but the discs, quote, would just slip away from them when they got near, and seemed to consciously avoid them whenever they got close. They even tried turning off the lights on their cars to try to sneak up on the objects, but the UFOs were wise to this tactic as well. An investigation of the landing site reportedly found nothing, but the patrolman was convinced the guards were telling the truth about seeing the object land. Neither the Atomic Energy Commission nor its successor, the Department of Energy, have ever declassified any information about this incident. It is believed that the Department of Energy is still highly involved with the UFO cover-up. UFO whistleblower Commander David Grush, as well as Colonel Carl Nell, among many others, have pointed out that some UAP records are made exempt from mandatory declassification under the Atomic Energy Act of 1954. This is called transclassification and is used to evade normal avenues of declassification or Freedom of Information Act requests. As the AEA of 54 is used to classify UAP information at the same level as nuclear secrets, as UFOs are known to emit radiation and atomic energy. This was an important point in the UAP Disclosure Act, which was written in response to the information that David Grush and other whistleblowers, as well as individuals connected to the legacy UFO program, provided to Congress. In our 1957 case, multiple other witnesses saw the same anomalies. 2 reporters described seeing the UFOs in Amarillo at 8:30. Strange red, green, and white lights, reportedly larger than an airplane. According to Sheriff Jack Cartwright, many people watched the lights from 7 p.m. to 8:30. Witnesses described the lights as bluish-green in color when it was first sighted, and said that it turned to a deep red glow as the object sank toward the western horizon. One witness, a fire marshal, Clay Angelo, watched the lights with his high-powered binoculars during this entire time. He described the light as, quote, brighter than any star I've ever seen. It gave off color similar to an arc weld and seemed to dwarf the other stars. Journalist and UFO researcher John Keel lamented that the 1957 wave was not as well researched as it should have been. During this UFO wave, it was not uncommon to read of egg-shaped crafts, or tic-tacs, flying over cars, disabling them, hovering over restricted military airspaces, or landing and traumatizing policemen. According to Robert Hastings, there have been over 100 UFO sightings in this area alone during the 50s and 60s. In some instances, jets were reportedly scrambled to pursue the objects. A MUFON report alleges that a black triangle was seen hovering over the base in 2005. Another intriguing Jellyfish UFO case comes to us from 1954, known as the Labrador incident. It is one of the most notable British UFO cases. This was a flight nicknamed by the pilots as the Champagne and Caviar Run, a luxury flight occupied by businessmen, film stars, and celebrities. 4 hours into the flight, while passing over Goose Bay, Labrador, the passengers and crew realized that something was stalking the plane. A, quote, large dark object, which changed shape like a flying jellyfish, shadowed the plane for 80 miles. Many of the 51 passengers aboard the plane, as well as the 11 members of the flight crew, including the pilots, reported the object. The incident was well documented in newspapers and news media at the time. The sheer amount of witnesses, credible trained observers, particularly the pilots and the rest of the flight crew, who would be familiar with any normal aircraft and other airborne objects, gives this strange report more credibility, in my opinion. They should have been able to identify this, but they couldn't. One of the key witnesses was the pilot, Captain Howard, who was a former bomber squadron leader with well over 7,500 hours of recorded flight experience, and this was his 265th crossing of the Atlantic. The following comes from the voyage report of Captain James Howard. Flying in clear weather, above a layer of low stratus clouds, I noticed on our port beam a number of dark objects at approximately the same altitude as our aircraft. In a newspaper interview, Howard described the moment when he first saw the objects. I drew the attention of the first officer, Lee Boyd, to them. He said he had just noticed them also. I jokingly said that they reminded me of flak bursts, and he agreed. It then became apparent that they were moving along on a track, roughly parallel to ours, and keeping station with us. The first officer then called Goose Approach to ask if there were any aircraft in our area. They said no. During this time, the shape of the large object changed slightly. Also, the positions of the smaller ones relative to the big ones. Some moved ahead, some behind. The first officer then told Goose what we were watching, and they said they would send a fighter to investigate. At this time, the objects resembled Sketch 2. The shape of the large one continually changed, but its position relative to us did not, always about 90 degrees to port. The distance from us appeared not less than 5 miles, possibly very much more. During this time, both engineers, both navigators, the radio officer, 2 stewards, and the stewardess watched it, and all of us agreed on its shape. The number of small objects accompanied it. Usually 6 were visible, and all were agreed that we had never seen anything like it before. The base sent out a fighter to approach the UFO. As soon as the fighter reported that he was approaching the plane, quote, the objects immediately began to grow indistinct until only one was visible. This grew smaller and finally disappeared, still at the same bearing to us. I reported to the fighter which direction to head for, and then commenced descent to Goose. As we taxied in, another fighter was dispatched to take over from the first.
On the day of the eclipse of the sun, some of the crew and passengers of a BOAC stratocruiser reported seeing mysterious objects in the sky over the Atlantic. When the airliner arrived back in Britain, the pilot, Captain James Howard, was asked to describe these objects by our reporter, Peter Meggs.
Well, very conveniently, Captain, we've got a nice blackboard here. Do you think you could illustrate this phenomenon for us? Could you show us what it looked like, very roughly?
I'll try. When I look out of the left-hand window of the nose of a stratocruiser, I see something like this. Well, that is the port wing. One of the engines is there. And on this occasion, the horizon was at about that level, with low clouds way beneath us. The sun had just set over here, and these objects appeared something like this. The large object appeared at times to be something like that, with the smaller objects in relation to it something like this. They were sometimes ahead of it, sometimes behind, and the shape of this object was continually changing. Sometimes one end would appear to disappear, sometimes this was very much larger, sometimes it was almost a V-shaped affair like this. It was always black in silhouette and always quite a clear edge to it.
And when it finally disappeared, it seemed to dissolve.
Yes, the smaller ones just disappeared first, and this shrunk down until it was no more than just a speck, and then even that disappeared.
After landing at Goose Bay, the crew was met by Air Force intelligence officers from the United States Air Force's investigation into UFOs, Project Blue Book. Quote, a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer met us, and we gave him the story. I spoke to Fighter Control, and he said he picked us up when we had the object in sight, but had nothing else on his screen but us. Quote, all who watched the objects are sure that the large one, at any rate, was no sort of winged aircraft. The small ones were just dots. They left no vapor trails. No lights were seen, just black silhouettes. The visibility at this altitude was unlimited, with no cloud other than low overcast. The sun had just set. A large flock of birds might explain it, if they were birds that could fly at a true airspeed of 238 knots at 19,000 feet, formatting on a Boeing for about 80 miles. I have never believed seriously in flying saucers. I am not sure that I do now. All I know is that I saw something extremely odd which was not an airplane." Unquote. Another airliner had passed through the area just 25 minutes earlier, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. First Officer Lee Boyd was quoted by a reporter from the Daily Express, stating, "It was the greatest thrill of my life. I'm willing to swear that what we saw was something solid, something maneuverable, and something that was being controlled intelligently." Another newspaper quoted 28-year-old air hostess Daphne Webster, who stated, "It was the most exciting sight I've ever seen, but a little creepy. I was making tea when I saw the objects. The big one was constantly changing its size and shape. 1 minute like a cigar, then an orange, then a mushroom. The smaller ones kept changing formation, but not their shape. Every one of us was far too intrigued to be afraid." The objects appeared to be not less than 5 miles away. It was difficult to assess their size because there was nothing in the sky at the time to measure them against. Captain Howard would state in a later interview, "Maybe it wasn't exactly a flying saucer. What I saw on a recent New York to London flight was more of a flying arrow, I guess you'd have called it at one stage. It seemed to keep changing its shape as it flew beside me, very much like a jellyfish assumes varying patterns as it swims through the water. Or maybe the apparent changes in shape were due to the different angles we viewed it from, as it banked and turned about 5 miles off. Whatever it was, a giant flying wing, jellyfish, or saucer, of these things I'm quite certain. It wasn't a trick of light or a figment of the imagination. It wasn't any sort of electrical, magnetic, or natural phenomenon, and it certainly wasn't a mirage. No, it was something real and substantial. Something that kept station with me for 80 miles and only sheared off when I got a radio call from the Sabre jet fighter, which had been sent up from Goose Bay to intercept the thing. It was something. The idea gives me slight goose pimples when I think of it, which was keeping my Boeing Stratocruiser under observation. Project Blue Book evaluated the UAP as the planet Mars. If anyone has ever seen Mars appear in such close proximity, changing shape, and seeming to be intelligently controlled, please let me know. This Blue Book file actually has a few oddities, one of which is a reference to a study of a photograph, yet there is no known photographic evidence related to this case. It's possible that the photographic study in question is actually referring to a different case on the same night. During this sighting, 300 miles northeast, a naval icebreaker reported a, quote, bright reddish yellow object, which was also reported to change shape and was compared to, quote, a jellyfish swimming to the westward, and later like a dart. It too was identified as the planet Mars. 14 years later, this incident was investigated under the United States Air Force-sponsored Colorado University study known as the Condon Report. The Condon Report was used as a justification to end Project Blue Book, stating that UFOs are not a threat to national security, and taking the stance that there is nothing anomalous about the phenomenon at all, even though some of the cases evaluated by the Condon Report were deemed to be anomalous. The Condon Report concluded that this encounter was a type of natural atmospheric phenomenon, quote, apparently so rare that it has never been reported before or since. A spokesman for the British Air Ministry refused to comment on the incident. There have been other reports of these jellyfish UFOs. One came to us as recently as 2022, when documents from the FAA leaked, confirming a UAP sighting over Minneapolis, which was described as jellyfish-like. Some have suggested that these shape-shifting, flying jellyfish are not typical mechanical UFOs, but biological creatures. Cryptozoologists have long cataloged sightings of what they call atmospheric beasts, or atmospheric jellyfish, which were believed to dwell in the sky. Some believe that atmospheric beasts serve as a possible biological explanation for some UFO sightings. Cryptozoologist and author Ivan T. Sanderson believed that some UFOs were low-density, lighter-than-air organisms, native to the skies. Since the beginning of interest in the UFO phenomenon, we have attempted to identify the source or sources of these sightings. In 1947, John Philip Besor of Pennsylvania wrote a letter to the U.S. Air Force to offer his own theory that UAP represent, quote, a form of space animal or creature of a highly attenuated ectoplasmic substance capable of materialization and dematerialization, whose propellant is a form of telekinetic energy. Regardless, there have been many strange UFO reports where the objects are described as changing shape, which would almost make it seem alive, but could also be explained by extremely advanced technology.